Is it Molly or?
It's me. I'm recording.
Oh, hey,
Oh, you are
hey, Molly.
Are you, Molly, are you also like letting people in the waiting room?
Yep, I will be in charge of that.
Oh, sorry, are we live?
Live. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, we just needed all right. Welcome everyone. Where am I focusing? Sorry, it's our first time to live stream. Welcome everyone to Bolton Circle.
Welcome.
We're looking at the owl. Okay, so we are running this event in a unique way today, so we're really excited. We're both in person here at the University of Texas at Austin, and also virtual for all of you who we see have logged in through Zoom. My name is Mary Newberger. I'm the director of the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. I'm a professor of history here at UT Austin, and this is my co-host.
Thank you very much. My name is Kirill Abramov, and I'm an assistant professor at the department and a co-host professor Newberger. Very excited to be in person today as we're looking for yet another exciting topic. We'll have a guest, who's knowledgeable about the intersection of history, technology, and of course, we hope that today we're going to have a lot of interesting and engaging questions. Mary, I would like you to introduce our host.
Well, before I do, I wanted to say that one of the Lyubomir's interests is mobilities, and we were just doing some traveling around Texas, and everyone asked us where we were from, and I said, well, I'm from Austin, but I'm originally from Oregon, but I live in Austin, and Lyubomir's from Bulgaria, but he lives in Germany. So it's a very interesting encounter with Texans elsewhere. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Lyubomir Pozharliev, who is a research associate at the Leibniz Institute for Länderkunde, or the Leibniz Institute for Regional Geography, in Leipzig, Germany. He received his doctorate in history and cultural studies from Justus Liebig University in Gießen, where he's still working and teaching. No, you're not anymore, are you?
Not working, but perhaps teaching.
He still has deep ties in the Department of East European History. He holds a BA in sociology from the University of Sofia and an MA in comparative history of Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe from Central University in Budapest, Hungary. His monograph, The Road to Socialism, Transport Infrastructure in Socialist Bulgaria and Yugoslavia, 1945 to 1989, will be published this year, we hope, and will be accessible in hardback and online copy. So we're all going to be watching for that book to come out, and his talk today is based on that research. His talk is entitled The Road to Socialism, Transport Infrastructure in Socialist Bulgaria and Yugoslavia.
Thank you very much. First of all, big thanks to all of you present here. I'm very grateful being here after a while. 2019, I believe, was the last year I have been doing conference traveling and stuff like that. And of course, the biggest gratitude goes to Professor Neuberger for inviting me, and of course to Kirill Abramov as well for co-hosting this lecture. It's a great pleasure to be in Texas, great pleasure to be at this university. You have a wonderful day. You just showed me around, you have wonderful space here. I'm really glad for you. I cannot say the same for the University of Gießen, but, but you should be proud and happy about your campus. I'm not going completely to keep the promise of the title, so I don't want to. I want actually to do three other things. Not only to show you cases on the examples from Yugoslavia and from Socialist Bulgaria, but I would like first to broaden your perspective towards infrastructure and technology. So that's my first main task of this lecture. My second task is to somehow to try to convince you that infrastructure matters significantly as a topic in history and in proper historiographical research. And third, if you get the first 2 points, you might want to get the book in one moment this year in the summer. So these are the 3 points I'm going to follow. I try to make it also considering that that we're in the States. I wanted to make it more from a global perspective. So I don't want to stick only to my examples from Yugoslavia, but I will show you, as you will see, several examples from the United States, also from South Korea, and so on. So I propose not to lose more time because there are plenty of slides to come. I propose that we kick off. So yes, I'm, regardless the name, I'm not a geographer. I'm trained as a sociologist first and then as a historian. But I'm working in a geographical research facility in Germany. Okay, so let's start with the year 1924 in Long Island, New York, USA. Anyone who has traveled the highways of America and has become used to the normal height of overpasses may well find something a little odd about some of the bridges over the parkways on Long Island, New York. Many of the overpasses are extraordinarily low, having as little as 9 feet of clearance at the curb. It turns out, however, that the 200 or so low-hanging overpasses on Long Island were deliberately designed to achieve a particular social effect. Robert Moses, the master builder of roads, you probably, some of you know him very well. He was a mayor developer in the pretty much in the first part of the 20th century in the States. Bridges and other public works from the 1920s to the 1970s in New York had these overpasses built to specifications that would discourage the presence of buses in his parkways. These are the words of the famous essay by Langdon Winner from 1980, Do Artifacts Have Politics?, which will become a major point of a huge debate around what is technology at all and what is infrastructure. Who was in these buses? You can easily imagine automobiles owning whites of upper and comfortable middle classes, as he called them, would be free to use, so Robert Moses called them, would be free to use the parkways for recreation and commuting. Poor people and blacks who normally used public transit were kept off the roads because the 12-foot tall buses could not get through the overpasses. One consequence was to limit access to racial minorities and low-income groups to Jones Beach, Moses' widely acclaimed public park. Moses made doubly sure of this result by vetoing a proposed extension of the Long Island Railroad to Jones Beach. Yes, these are the bridges. You see how low it can get. And of course, we can imagine it is very clearly how the audience in the buses was. So this is that was my, when I was reading that essay already in my BA years for first time in my life, that was my starting point where I started. Why infrastructure? Why? And it is largely debatable. There in the debate, many claim that actually most probably Moses wasn't a racist, and probably he didn't thought of that in that manner. So the debate is ongoing and it's not settled down. Yet again, that was my starting point, and my second starting point was that by chance, I learned Serbo Croatian during my MA years, and I decided, okay, why not do something with Yugoslavia? These are my two starting points. Where is the problem? What is the character of the glue that holds the social world more or less together? Sociologists tend to switch registers. They talk of the social, and then, if they talk at all, they talk of the technical. And it appears the technical acts either as a kind of explanatory deus ex machina, meaning the technological determinism. So we're slaves of technology, right? Or it is treated as an expression of social relations or social reductions. So we speak of technology, but actually we speak of social relations, not of technology. And third, or with difficulty, the two are treated as two classes of objects which interact and mutually shape one another. This is again an American scholar. No, he's British, I think, John Law, who is working in the science and technology studies. As you see, it's kind of already an old famous article of his. The problem of heterogeneity, society is held together, and I continue following this line of argument, is held together by heterogeneousness. What appears to be social is partly technical. What we usually call technical is partly social. Neither is anything purely social at all. And the same may be said for the economic, the political, the scientific, and all the rest. Social order is not a social order at all. It is a socio-technical order. Did you really, and the year is 1995, 1991, and he already questions us. Did you really find your way through the last week without machines? We were driving quite a while with a weird Google Maps experience. And there is no Google, no internet in that moment, not internet as we know it today. And of course, notice his answer, your type machine. And if you pretend otherwise, then this is presumably because you prefer to do otherwise. All right. Couple of words about technology. This is the very same article. So not to get confused with what we started with Winner. But these guys from STS, starting from Bruno Latour, Michel Cowan, Langdon Winner, John Law, and many others will claim very similar things from different perspectives. The things we call technologies are ways of building order in our world. Technological innovations are similar to legislative acts or political foundings that establish a framework for public order that will endure over many generations. Technological systems, this is Thomas P. Hughes, very famous American historian, who says pretty much the same, but in other words, technological systems, as he calls them, contains messy, complex, problem-solving components. They're both socially constructed and society shaping. The year is 1997. When this field was actually on the rise, that was in the mid-80s and then throughout the 90s. This is his wording. Large technological system is the way how he calls technology. Thomas Hughes, how he calls that. I am also taking over because I claim in my PhD book that we cannot refer to infrastructure as one single thing, so only roads or only one thing. There is no road without a car. That's why it's complex and messy. Speaking of that, my favorite scholar of infrastructure in his definitions and a colleague of mine at the University of Leipzig, I would claim that probably one of the brightest minds in this field of research, Dirk van Laak, the head of the Department of Contemporary History in Leipzig. Infrastructures, that's my translation from German, I'm sorry for that. Infrastructures are the societal integration media of first importance. Thus, technocratic concepts of the state have been used as instruments of control, and to that extent must be placed alongside constitutional and political concepts of integration of the 20th century. Pretty much the same what Langdon Winner says. So we should think of that like, if we're speaking of roads, we can think in the very same manner as we are speaking of laws about social welfare or anything else. Few other areas of society occupy such a pronounced intermediate position as infrastructure. It opens up, connects, links, integrates. It is both the prerequisite and the result of interactions between spatial, temporal, and social layers, and one of the most effective media for opening up and ordering public space. So this is again from Infrastrukturgeschichte is the name of the article, 2001. Let's go even more narrow to what I'm researching, and I call it, I know it's not proper English expression, but I'm calling it auto transport infrastructure. But basically you can also, in the British version, it should be motor vehicle infrastructure. And it embodies visions of road construction as well as their interrelationships with vehicles, drivers, and riders. Auto transportation infrastructure meets both definitions, the one of LTS by Hughes and the more narrow one by Van Laak. The characteristic of modern car transport infrastructures are visions for the role of the motor roads, pragmatic, technical, as well as symbolic. The realized social functions, relations that do not necessarily correspond to the predefined ideological framework, and the practical uses of the infrastructures by all of us. The automobility understood as the vehicles, the drivers, and the actual car and road. So I'm listing all of these components to try to convince you that this is LTS. We're speaking of a system, and that's why scholars like John Urry, who passed away a couple of years ago, will speak of, or Mimi Scheller in Philadelphia will speak of the system of automobility. So we're not speaking only of one component. Identity. So we were having this debate in the car. Should we use or should we not use this term anymore? I claim that in certain situations we might still use it, if that's okay. Identities are anchored around a test of moral propositions that regulate values and behavior. So that identity construction necessarily involves ideas of right and wrong, desirable, undesirable, unpolluted, polluted. This is by short. The fundamental features of national identity, as early as Smith claimed it, as was a historical territory or homeland, common needs, historical memory, common mass public culture, common legal rights and duties for all members, a common economy with territorial mobility for members. So he was among the first scholars who thought that actually we should include the mobility even in those definitions. And so the construction of infrastructure and technology is an important ideological argument and at the same time identity forming instrument. Just to clarify, because I don't have a slide on that to clarify, I use particularly Brubaker and Cooper's idea where there are two types of identity. One is the one we own, we feel, and the one which is imposed on top of us. And this is the case of Yugoslavia and Bulgaria's infrastructure. So these things do not overlap. Only that the Communist Party would want to create, let's say, a Yugoslav identity does not mean that everyone believed it. Or appreciated or became its identity, but in certain cases, perhaps it was over time, it became part of us, or partially part of us. So that was back in the days what I wanted, what were my intentions, what worked out is another matter. Is focus on my book, is focus on the ideological and political uses of anti-transport infrastructure in these two socialist countries. And the impact of this infrastructure on national homogenization or fragmentation of these countries on the one hand, and the identity building on the other, with this remark for Brubaker. So, yes, okay. So a little bit just to contextualize what was it, and then I'll go to the global examples, which are, in my opinion, far more talkative to all of us on the one hand, and on the second hand, far more fun. So briefly, how it worked out. So these are the first concepts of constructing highways. The most important one is called Brotherhood and Unity, Bratstvo i Jedinstvo. Highway in Yugoslavia, which I will show you, it's basically what is referred an artery. On the opposite in Bulgaria, there was constructed three highways, which will create something which is referred as the ring, Magistralen Prsten. The first inauguration was 74 in the Bulgarian case. In the Yugoslav case, starts far earlier. We should note that the very first highways are still not modern 2-lane roads plus the shoulder. So it is still the very first one will be still more something what is like highway in the States. Then there is this, I will show you Jadranska Magistrala, which is basically the Adriatic highway. And I'll show you a little bit more from these examples. And then we move globally. How am I with timing? 20 minutes, okay. Trachea, Hemus, Black Sea Highway. So this is something I will stand up for a second. This is called its official name is called Magistralen Prsten, the highway ring. I have spent a whole chapter on that concept, and it is called, and I'm calling it the vicious circle. The vicious circle is this ring excludes all Muslims to the south and to the northeast, and connects what I would claim Bulgarians with other Bulgarians. So it is only to connect Sofia with the second largest city, Plovdiv, then Burgas, the second biggest port, Varna, the second largest port, and then it goes back to the capital. So this is the vicious circle. I will stop here, but I just wanted to give you an idea where does it go. That road is the only exception that goes to Istanbul. Here is Istanbul, right? The old center. And these sections which are going to Serbia, to Romania, they don't exist. This connectedness with the neighbors, better not. So it is it is a road dedicated for inner ideological usages. But if there is time, I might return to that point in one moment. With Yugoslavia, where should I point this?
There, try now.
Completely different concept. The idea of Yugoslavia was to create Yugo identity, and these are the wording which the Yugoslav Communist Party will use, Yugoslav identity. And it is called Brotherhood and Union, output Bratstva Jedinstva. And this is, as you see, it starts connecting basically the three oldest capitals. So Ljubljana, Zagreb in Croatia, and then Belgrade. And then actually, if we have to be honest, it will stop. That's on the map, but maps are not realities, as we know, or there are other forms of realities which are rather mental. So Skopje first is somehow outside, and this road was never really constructed. Actually, some sections are still missing. Then we see Pristina and Kosovo. This province was a donut. They were not even thinking of doing anything there. And then we are speaking of Kosovo and how backward it is. Then we can understand. With Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's very weird, and it's a very complicated case because the Bosnians are very well represented on the highest communist levels, and yet again they didn't manage to push for their own road. On the contrary, though, they managed to gain railroads. So Bosnia is a slightly different case, and we see Vojvodina, that section, Belgrade and Vojvodina will be constructed. Montenegro, similar as in the case of Bosnia, to an extent, railroads, and generally, but it was far more important for the coal industry than actual mobility within. But yet again, we have a clear artery with clear ideological message, and that message will be maintained throughout the whole period. Okay, and now I'll sit. I just wanted to show you that. So this is how it started. We built for the fatherland. In Bulgaria, the construction of roads was linked to the construction of the socialist identity through youth labor movement. By the way, the same we witness also in Yugoslavia. In Yugoslavia, I would claim it was more successful than in Bulgaria. So they're constructing the roads and in the same time constructing themselves as socialists. So it is a double building in a way. In the same time, it aimed the construction of national identity understood as a Bulgarian one, which will be a turn later than from building for the fatherland will soon become building for Bulgaria. Far more nationalistic narrative, which will peak particularly in the 80s, and where Professor Neuberger has a book on that. It was used to symbolize the connection between generations, the connection to the past and its Bulgarian moral virtues materialized in the highway ring, the vicious circle. The road to a new life was closely linked with the fatherland, with Otečestvo, thus remaining within a rather classical understanding of national identity. We build the road builds us. That was an early slogan, particularly for the railway construction. I just have sent, there is a small sub-chapter which is dedicated on that, and it's called in Serbo-Croatian, Mi gradimo pruga, pruga gradi nas. We build the road builds us. So the similar concept as what I have shown in Bulgaria, that there is a double idea of double construction, but here there was trans-ethnic identity, which will paralyze the old tensions between Serbs, Croats, Muslims, and so on and so forth. It was precisely the idea of this Slavic union, the Yugoslav identity, that was infused with Marxist ideological and political content. The road is connecting the territories of the main republics of the Federation, reveal the horizons and ways leading to the common Yugoslav socialist future. The roads to a new life, literally and metaphorically, repeated the Yugoslavian slogan of Brotherhood and Union. Brotherhood and Union is not only the high road, that was the slogan of the country of the Socialist Federation of Yugoslavia. And now I move to the global examples. I'll stop with my dissertation because I think I want to showcase how these tools can be used in different contexts globally, not only Bulgaria, not only Yugoslavia, and that how can we use it. So in this typology I'm referring, if my former supervisor hears that I use the term typology, he will shoot me at the moment. We don't use typology anymore, it's only practices. So, but anyway, in this typology, the role is connecting and defining the places of the national pride, constructing the map of the important topoi for the purposes of imagining the nation. The roads is a display. And I have another chapter which is called The Display of Socialism. It is a display. And I will show you the beautiful map. So I'll go by each of single of these points and show also one this time, of course, one non-infrastructural example. Now let's return to the States where we are. The natural beauty, especially of parts of the Western United States, was intended to compensate for the lack of historic buildings, such as castles and urban architecture that Europe provides. The Blue Ridge Parkways landscape architect and first superintendent Stanley Abbott sought to build a museum of managed American countrysides. Fascinating concept. Let me make a small stop. 2014, I was for a conference in Philadelphia, and then we went with my wife to San Francisco, and we took, by our host, we took 2 bikes and went biking in a park, and then we were out everywhere by cars, which for the Eastern European, regardless whoever European, you don't, it's always forbidden to have cars in the parks. And then I started thinking, isn't that weird? And I thought, okay, I should investigate it more. Unfortunately, there was always smarter guys who already did that. And this is this guy, Thomas Zeller, who discusses how the concept of parkway was constructed in the 19th century America. Thomas Zeller is based at the German Historical Institute in Washington, but he's German. The roads were built with the goal of not only offering scenic views to non-local tourists, mostly middle-class urbanities, we return to London Winner here, were imagined as users when the roads were planned, but also to transform the landscapes they traversed. The Blue Ridge Parkways was at least initially unpopular with many local residents. State force eventually forced them to abandon hunting, foraging, farming with previous methods, and moonshining in and around the parkway's landscape. Let's give it a look of this beauty. These are the Blue Ridge Parkways. America's favorite journey. So you see 75 years Blue Ridge Parkway. And this is how it should be. This is the proper behavior. This is what you do. And these are the right people at the right place. And when eventually moonshining as well and stuff like that. But this is how you should do that. And who should do that? Okay. Another example, this time from about maintaining the beauty, the national beauty. This is Jadranska Magistrate, which I mentioned. So this is the Adriatic highway, which is 100% ideologically as well as literally, like in terms of road, constructed as panoramic or scenic road. Same concept. Go and see how beautiful Croatia is. We have, by the way, similar examples in Bulgaria as well. We have the Under-Balkan road was constructed in order to showcase also the Balkan mounts, or in this case, Sredna Gura Mount. Yes. So, next, the cultural historical heritage, or this is orientation, what I call towards the past. The Deutsche Alpenstrasse was routed as a pathway from one tourist attraction to another, from Hitler's mountain retreat close to Berchtesgaden in the east to Schloss Neuschwanstein, where King Ludwig II's neo-romantic castle was in the west. Church steeples and mountain peaks taken together symbolized a cultural landscape with a particular Nazi bent. In a decidedly millennial mood, the Nazi regime placed itself at the pinnacle of history. It was to be the result of landscape history and human history. The roads were presented to an ethnically cleansed German populace as a gift from its regime, indeed a gift from Hitler himself, who put his political weight behind the project. Tourism as part of the Nazi consumer culture in this regard was still very paternalistic. But I will show you, here we have a double overlap. So this is in Blick von der Terrasse Haus Wachenfeld nach Berchtesgaden. So basically we have, and I'll speak about it shortly about Todor Zhivkov. Here is also, how can I say, a taste of voluntarism. So he linked his own personal villa. That's it. It's not only about the ideology, it was that he made the road to his villa. And this is going to make Josip Broz Tito Yugoslavia, making a road to this famous lake. I always forget it, which Jezero was that. But anyway, he created to his villa, and then Todor Zhivkov will do the same highway to his hometown. I'll show you in a second. But this is how it looks now, and it is a different concept, as you see, from the motorway. So it is here, it is for creating national appreciation. Let's go further. So this is the guy, this smiley guy, this is Todor Zhivkov. And this is, so you saw the so-called vicious circle. Actually, the only section which from the northern showed that the northern part of Chemus Highway was built was only to this beautiful town, his hometown, the city of Pravets. That was the only section really from Chemus Highway which was really built. Everything else was only on the map. Imagine it. Construction. By the way, it still does not exist. He introduced many more things than infrastructure to his hometown, including the first Bulgarian kind of computers. They were computers and supposedly robotic. Unfortunately, many of those things are these traditions which were constructed in the 80s are a long time ago gone. Anyway, but this is an example of the favorite and or birthplaces of the political leaders. Sorry for the mistake, leaders. What's that?
It looks German.
It looks German.
Sliders.
Sorry.
Humor leader.
Okay. So let's go to South Korea. The Jeongbuk Highway, a real highway that had been under construction for nearly 2 years. This highway, which would span the 430 kilometers between South Korea's two largest cities, Seoul and Busan. As the first large-scale highway running diagonally across the entire country, it was believed by many in South Korea to be the key to achieving economic superiority over North Korea and thereby taking a step toward unification. So this is what I refer to as the orientation towards the future, or new forms of via modernization and industrialization, which should supposedly form a new type of national pride. The Jeongbuk Highway, during and after its construction, was a tangible artifact that embodied the beliefs and visions held by Park and many South Koreans, that of Korea as an industrialized, modernized, and unified nation. To build a highway was simultaneously to modernize a country and fight against North Korean communism. Let me show you some couple of pictures from the Jeongbuk Highway and how it was also introduced in the mass culture. So these are, as you see, post stamps. There were popular books, even like that type of comics alike, and more and more. And it is still continues to be the largest highway in South Korea. But we see this in how highways can construct realities or express realities. Okay. Furthermore, the infrastructure is a symbol of the national greatness. Here, the hypothesis is that no, a second. Let's move. the national greatness. Okay. They constructed a Swiss identity that emphasized alpine nature as the moral foundation for the Swiss state. So we're in Switzerland now. Based on liberty and human rights, in contrast to some other emerging European nation states, Swiss ideologies define their country as small yet harboring 4 different cultures and languages. To legitimize Switzerland's existence as a nation state, they did not make claims of a common language or ethnicity. Instead, the Alps, and this is, you can make to feel the similarity with the Blue Ridge Parkways, the Alps bound the Swiss people together. Here again, the Gotthard Mountains form the heart of this politicized Alpine myth. This is Schuller de la Tête, that was her PhD book on the construction of the Swiss nation around the Gotthard Tunnel. So 50 Jahre Gotthard, the electrified Saint Gotthard route, the electrified Simplon route. This is that's an imaginary of a representation of the Swiss nation. In a very, the metaphor is more than clear. This is in mass culture nowadays. By the way, they're right now renovating it and making it even bigger and with 5 lanes, with I don't know what. So it's an ongoing project. Many of those projects never end, that they start in one moment in time, but doesn't seem to end. Okay. Infrastructure examination of the national or folk spirit, that's specific German, like we can claim that there is something which is called Deutsche Technique, and there was certain ideologies in Germany from the 1920s in particular, which were trying to construct the concept that Germans are technologically oriented people. The essence of the technology is namely to biological nature given thought and action, which is now the central focus of all political, völkisch, and cultural spheres. Technology is nothing other than applied natural science. Nature was thus assigned the role of teacher of technicians and of engineers. Thus, this planned German technology bound to nature was now opening vast treasure for the folk. Motorists were constantly reminded that the landscapes which they experienced were German and essentially so. So their car trips were supposed to reaffirm their belonging to an ethnically understood collective whose cultural values were expressed in its landscapes, but also in its technology. So this is again something which reminds of Deutsche Alpenstraße, but it's not necessarily always the same, because one is the relation to the landscape and to the scenic, another is the relation to you as constructor of a road and as a technological nation. And that is very present, omnipresent in Germany even now, made in Germany. So we can make it because we are the technological ones, not made in China, made in Germany. Okay, links between, let me continue further. And I think I might be good with timing, I don't know. Another example, infrastructure as a national communion, accruing all people as equal representatives of the nation. In his first State of the Union address in 1941, President Manuel Avila Camacho declared that it is not possible to truly integrate a sense of the nations without an ample road network that facilitates economic exchange and connects human groups. By equating, and I use this approach of Michael Bess, another scholar, I use Michael Bess word, equating road building with nation building. I like his metaphor very much. The new president of Mexico signaled agreement with the general attitude which many contemporary elites shared. This is a quote by Dirk van Lack from another essay. I left it in German, but what is said here is that the Bundesverkehrsminister, so the Minister of Transport of Bundesrepublik Deutschland, so the Western Germany, claimed that Georg Kleber is his name, claimed that every single German citizen should be connected with a highway, automobile highway, not more than 25 kilometers away. So, and in particular, where my former university was settled down in Gießen, it is completely true. In the land of Hessen, that happened. In other areas, like in Bavaria, it didn't. It was not. After he said that, this is in the early 70s. I'm sorry. After that, the oil crisis will hit, and this plan will be reshaped or will never come into being in completeness. But in certain areas, it did. It did do the job with 25 kilometers, and you can imagine this national approach. So 25 kilometers, each citizen should have a highway. So highway becomes like a human right in a way for the Germans. So also this is another form of scenario, which is against scenic, but it shows modernization. We're in Belgrade. This is the new Belgrade. It showcases of the Brotherhood and Unity Highway should, in a scenic manner, in an imposing manner, should show how we are modernizing. And I believe even from this picture only is very clear what was the message. And so that's around the highway. That's the Sava Center, which was basically the fair, if I'm not mistaken. Again, Brotherhood and Unity Highway in Belgrade. By the way, it will be in a similar manner, will be constructed in Zagreb and in Ljubljana. So it is not only Belgrade. This is furthermore Belgrade and the highway. You see down where is the highway, and these are all like representative buildings of socialist Yugoslavia. That will be, I think, now I'm heading to my last example. Infrastructure as civilizing power. So I will show you one example, which is I just wanted to bring it up because it's relevant also in a way to what's going on now in Ukraine. And so this is an example of a channel, not of a highway, but I wanted to bring it that it can imply also imperialistic views, strongly imperialistic. And here's one wonderful historian, Klaus Kester, who is the professor of contemporary history in Tübingen. He wrote, this is his second book, this is his habilitation book, on Stalinische Großbauten. So basically the large-scale projects of Stalin. And here we have the Moscow Volga channel, which was built, constructed, and what we'll see, he uses also the term Schaufenster, which means display, as I'm using it also for roads, that roads are displays. Let me show you the pictures, and you might even understand them on your own. So this is the Hauptwasser of Rechnowy Wokzał, Flusshafen, so basically the port, which reminds of the Dogen Palace in Vanity. It is Soviet replica of the Palace of the Doges in Venice, and this is on a channel. I'll show you the channel now. Schleusen Nummer 3, so the I don't know what's the word, but the channel, let's say, code, it reminds of the Caravel Santa Maria with Christoph Columbus and with which Columbus, sorry, I'm trying to translate from German, with which Columbus entered America. This is the same channel. I'll show it in a second. So we have a reference point in 1492 from a Stalin's channel. So okay, so that means that Stalin, what Gestre is saying, that Stalin probably envisioned himself as something like Columbus, or at least a legitimate Nachfolger, legitimate. I don't know, but let me show you the pictures. So this is the original, the Palace of the Doges, and here it is here on this Moscow channel. This is how it looks. So I find it absolutely fascinating. That was 1930. I will lie about the early 30s when they created it, but I believe the reference point is fairly clear. Columbus, Santa Maria, and here it is on the channel, Schleuse Nummer 3. Great replica with 500 centuries difference. So that implies very much the way how infrastructure can be used for which reasons, for how much. In this case, it's much more about civilizing power and imperialism, which we witness in a new form today. Again, more recent picture. I find it absolutely fascinating what Klaus Gesto found. And this is a very small conclusion of mine. I'm done actually with my presentation. The comparison analysis, this is of my first book, reviews forms of socialist rule through the complex prism of political and ideological usages of road policies. The Yugoslav model of transport infrastructure development is dynamic, characterized by connectedness to the trans-European road network, gradual domination of economic and pragmatic arguments over the ideological and utopian discourse, relatively weak state control of the road infrastructure, and increase of the system of automobility. Something which is not the case in Bulgaria. The Bulgarian model of road development is static. I'm using this static and dynamic argument as well sometimes, based on strict political control over the movement of people via address registrations and other forms. So roads was one instrument out of many. And that is why we should call it a system, not simply the roads on its own. Confinement in the boundaries of nation state, domination of ideological discourse of the roads over economic arguments. And I will stop here. This is the cover of the book. I strongly hope it comes out now this year. Hopefully in June it will be also with an open access PDF available. So this is where in Germany we're all obliged to publish open access. But if you are keen to have the hard copy, you can buy it. Thank you very much for your attention. And for those of you who are interested, I made a slide with all of the literature used. So here is Klaus Gesto. So you can, if some of these guys are intriguing to you, you can simply write some of the names. Yes, that's it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I forgot to thank our sponsors. So I did want to thank the Center for European Studies, the Center for Russian East European and Eurasian Studies, the Department of History, and the Historical Institute. These are all of our sponsors. So thank you so much for this presentation. I'm so excited to get the book and to realize I can get it for free online. It's even more exciting. And so if people have questions, you can go ahead and raise your hand. Looks like Steven Siegel already has a
Yeah,
question.
we have something in the
I have
chat.
some too, but let's go ahead and have Steven, since he raised his hand so quickly, go ahead and ask his question.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes,
Yes.
we can now, yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So first, I want to congratulate you on this book and offer maybe one very short question, if you're able to hear me. So I did spend some time in Leipzig at the Leibniz Institute, where you came from, at the Institute for Landeskunde, when I was there on my sabbatical in 2014. And I had a wonderful time there, managed to work between the Herder Institute and Gießen and Mainz and Frankfurt and a couple of other places. So this is going to be a German question for you.
Yes.
I'm really interested in the way that you situate infrastructure and cartography and modernity in a larger German, maybe Germanocentric plus Eastern European space. And this sounds very reductive because I agree with you on just about everything, like 99% of everything. So the most interesting thing that I found from your presentation was this conjunction of infrastructural modernity with the kinds of maps that were used in this period to almost erase places. I think the flip side of this colonial modernity And I'm thinking about projects, not just in German history, but also like the Silk Road project,
Oh, yeah.
are to the extent that there are things, places, pasts that are now off the map. So I guess my question for you with this rigorous kind of futuristic project of modernity, especially for the Bulgarian case, what exactly is erased? Is it regional space? Is it populations that fall, let's say, beyond the scope of the Balkans, so Persian-speaking peoples, Ottoman? What is it exactly in this period, let's say, going forward into the 1980s that you see as almost overridden by these hegemonic projects in future-looking cartography? This is really like a kind of critical cartography, critical geography question, if that makes sense. It's inspired by Peter Hoslinger at the Herder Institute, and as you know, his work from Gießen. So thanks very much. This is a really great talk, I'm glad you had fun with it, because I was sort of like laughing along at a lot of the Bulgarian maps that are really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, what can I say? So I can only agree on that, and that there is, with mapping concretely, with mapping, there is certain research, particularly by critical contemporary geographers who are doing, I'm thinking now, for instance, I was reading on maps of Europe, Alexander Badenoch, they published an edited volume where they unfortunately, I have to admit that within this book, I didn't have enough time to make an analysis only of maps, and that even maps on their own can speak more than enough. Maps are amazing historiographical source. Unfortunately, I'm using more. My maps are weren't the center, but maps were necessarily in order at least to showcase to picture you what was happening. About erasing, that's always kind of difficult because infrastructure is already materialized. It is already present. It is integrated in a specific landscape. It is integrated, of course, in a specific way in towns and communities and so on. But it is not a written source. So you cannot really read it in the way we are reading sources, historiographical sources. So I'm saying that in order to say that there is, of course, a certain type of unreflected and also certain type of speculation by claiming how much do we erase by that. But we can, let's say, let's return shortly to the Bulgarian case. My claim in the dissertation, I don't know if I have this slide, because I didn't enter so much concretely into the project, but I have a tables where I show where exactly these roads were constructed, and all roads which were constructed for the Bulgarian Muslims, I mean the Pomaks and the Turkish, were third and fourth classes. So they were, so to say, this is very interesting phenomena, which we overlap here with another famous Bulgarian historian, Mikhail Gruev, who says that there is a modernization, but at place. So stay home, we will get you modernized there. So you introduce in the 1950s, this is Mikhail Gruev, not me. In the 1950s, you introduce the new modern toilet, which exchanges the Ottoman one, which means the toilet goes into the house, not outside the house. And this is the same applies. So the way they do the toileting, it's the same the way they do the infrastructure. So they create the roads. You will get modernized, but don't leave the village. Stay there. You get the roads, but you shouldn't escape. So this is very important. I believe very important, and we can see it via roads when you see that there are no highways or no intention even of first class roads to be built there. Over there, you built only the local ones. By the way, this we can claim it. By the way, this paternalistic and to a large extent also, okay, let's leave it. Just paternalistic approach is to an extent still followed by certain Bulgarian elites and the Bulgarian kind of Turkish party, which modernizes locally. So in order to hold the key, I don't know if I answered your, I'm not sure, but I just wanted to give you one more example.
That was great. I'm still laughing. I'm just saying we need more not in my backyard isms. So this is the American kind of acronym for, yeah, thank you so much. This is great. I really appreciate it.
All right,
Uh,
yeah, we're gonna call in Brigitte
Brigitte.
Lenormand. So happy to have you here, Brigitte. Hello.
Hello, greetings from Maastricht. I have a question about just your one of the statements on your conclusion. You noted that Yugoslavia shifted from a more ideologically driven infrastructural building program towards a more pragmatic and economically driven one. And I was just wondering if you could give an example of how that operated with reference to either highways or rail or any other kinds of transportation infrastructure.
Okay. Nice to see you. That has been a while. I think 2019 or when was that? Thank you very much, of course, for the question. We can see that that's. I think in that case, like for me, it's a little bit easier to answer that question than the one of Stephen. So here we have kind of clear. Very clear historical sources. So we can speak of passports. So the way the so-called Gastarbeiter were allowed, and later on the Germans will start to call the Brotherhood and Unity highway. We'll call it the Gastarbeiterweg, the road of the Gastarbeiter. So of the guest workers, basically, which were gradually increasing, and that was tolerated absolutely officially by Tito, and not only Tito, but the Yugoslav Communist Party. They were granted the permission and granted the passports to leave the country if they would like to work. That is definitely not the case, as we know, of Bulgaria. So that's one level of things. And a second level is that it got really more dynamic in multiple ways. Cars which were imported from exactly by the same these guys were working abroad. Cars which are imported and were traveling to Yugoslavia, and there is a huge level of inner and outer tourism which was on the growth. Tourism plays a huge role. I didn't have the time now to explain it, but I can make a, how can I say, a short metaphor. What is the difference between Yugoslav and Bulgarian tourism? And the metaphor goes like that. The Yugoslav was a car-oriented tourism and camping tourism. So you go on the coastal line on the Jadranska Magistrala with your camper. Quite a lot of Germans, Austrians, and Yugoslavs will do that. You camp. By the way, they will all complain. I analyzed that in the book. They all complain because you don't spend enough money and throw your cans and trash everywhere. So it's it was highly debated and frustrating particularly for the locals' touristic experience. The Bulgarian way, because of extensive, including infrastructural control, is you build huge hotels in the resorts of Zlatni Piasovci or Svonchev Breg or wherever, Sunny Beach, and so on, and you fly them in. So you can control them. No highways. It's closed in the hotel under strict supervision of the former state security. That's it. You don't go and move around with your car and eat fish and throw cans. No.
So thank you very much, Brigitte. I hope
that I answered you. I don't know. Brigitte, but just two examples.
May I ask a really quick follow-up question? So going back to concepts you introduced at the beginning, does the new orientation then shape the construction of infrastructure? So do you get, for example, new plans for highways that specifically serve the idea of what tourism should be like or something like that?
Yes, sure. Jadranska Magistrala is 100% was meant and thought as an example of tourist highway. This is how they should do it. What I forgot to answer to reply in the previous to your previous question is, of course, the question of pride. So the trucks basically, and trucks will play extensively important role, and it is ideologically from the Yugoslav wanted and this will be an ongoing debate up to the end of the period where they don't want to build any link with Bulgaria. And this is the shortest way to Istanbul. The way, if you imagine the map, how the road goes, you save around approximately 350 kilometers, so let's call it, I don't know, 300 miles, between, if you enter via Bulgaria to the road to Istanbul. No, they will redirect the trucks all down over Macedonia, Gevgelia, and then they enter via Thessaloniki, so on, and go to Istanbul. And that will be a very clearly state-controlled ideology of the Yugoslavs in order to first to keep their freight and the exchange with Turkey, and basically in that way with the Middle East, to keep it in their own hands. So the question of freight plays a huge role as well, both ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead. I have, comments and questions, but Maria, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I used to have maybe an easy question.
Go ahead, please.
Who knows? But because you started with Langdon Wiener and politics,
Yeah.
I was sort of waiting for, and because the paper title has something about socialism, I was waiting to hear about the difference that socialism makes to modernity and infrastructure. And I appreciate that instead you contrast Bulgaria and Yugoslavia. It's always good to complexify socialisms as varied and different. So it's good, necessary work. But I was curious, especially in your slideshow, you just flipped between the US in the 20s, South Korea, and Eastern Europe and Germany. And is there anything that you can say about socialist state building and modernity that is has this sort of residually has that history built into the infrastructure? Especially because for me, I study Russia. Socialist modernity, the relationship to automobiles was really different.
Yes.
Especially early on. I don't know if Yugoslavia and Bulgaria, but especially as the relationship in winter between public transport, versus private automobiles. That's very differently inflected in capitalist modernity and socialist. Did that make a difference? Can you trace differences across different modernities, even between the 50s and the 70s?
Sure. Many thanks for the question. Yes, so a couple of things. On the one hand, we have this relatively well investigated field of automobility, and here crucial role played people like John Urry, but then from historical perspective, Louis Ziegelbaum, I would say, the Socialist People's Carolist Anthology, and then we have quite a lot of actually scholars who spend some time working on the perception of the socialist car and what happened here. I'll quote a colleague of ours, which we were together at the ACEs in Zagreb 3 years ago, Luminica Gatažel. She makes a fascinating comparative analysis between Soviet and Romanian type of automobility culture. So that was her first book. So this we have there in this field, we have a good research, and yes, one of the claims which comply with many other scholars is that actually we cannot claim 100% universal type of socialism which took place elsewhere. As we know, state socialism had some foundational foundings, ground, which was also ideological, linked to Marx and Lenin and so on. And then we had certain totalitarian aspects which were everywhere throughout. But from there on in its practice, and the closer you get to everyday examples, including cars, it starts to be very different. And that will very much, I discussed the situation of cars as well. And it's a huge difference between the Yugoslav version, the Bulgarian one, and the Soviet one. And within the Soviet one, it's a huge difference. I can say, for instance, that on an average, the Bulgarians were privileged to have more cars than most of the Russians. And that will be apply also for the Baltic states, which will get access to more cars than let's say, inner Russia, and not to speak of Central Asia. You can forget about it. And Bulgarians will be privileged. Yet again, the Bulgarians will be 100% dependent on the Soviets because there were no local car production. On the contrary, Romania and Yugoslavia will have its own, and the Czech Republic famously, and the one and only company which is prior to the socialist period is, of course, the Czech company. And the Czechs are with very specific and very fascinating case, by the way. The Yugoslav will have the Yugos. We were joking that they will even attempt in the 80s to import it to Canada and the States for a little while, up until the wars. So, and having your own car facilities makes a huge difference. And then we can add to that also the import via the Gastarbeiter. So it was they were far more mobile, literally.
I was
Yes.
curious, like, when you talked about the freeways, you talked
Uh-huh.
about cars, but you didn't mention buses. So I guess that's a good example. Were they really identified with the car culture, which you said were different? Or is there, like as you said with Nina, right? They weren't thinking about buses. Why was it, in your talk, it seems like really car-centered as opposed to bus-centered. And is that actually the reality?
On the one hand, we should not forget, and this is largely the argument of Luminica Gataja, that we are speaking about a huge deficit. We are speaking of societies of Janusz Kornai, societies of deficits, basically. That means and she managed more or less to prove it, that the actual waiting time was in Romania, in the Soviet Union, was at least 10 years. I can confirm that 100%. My father waited for his Zhiguli exactly 10 years. It was purchased 1973. He got it 1982. So this is, I can confirm the statistic of Luminica. It is true. At least 10 years you wait. In the meantime, of course, you move somehow. So that means you take the railroad and that's it. Yes, in the practice, you actually do have extensive usage. What is important is that we don't have a ban like there was an try of banning private transportation in the Soviet by when was that Khrushchev era? They tried to introduce the concept of the shared taxes. That's not the case in Bulgaria. That we don't have that, and it is definitely also not the case. If you know, Louis Ziegelbaum claims the only two countries in the world which were completely banned private automobilism. That's North Korea and Albania. These are the two countries. So we speak that we have also extreme examples where it was basically all public in a way, in the case of Albania. What was the practice though? I'm not that sure, but we saw how it exploded after the 90s. But I believe just one last word, it is important that that's one of the points of this book is that we do comparisons. Because nobody really wanted. There are very few scholars who at all engage in comparisons between Bulgaria and Yugoslavia, regardless in which field. I know a colleague from the Belgrade History Institute, Milan Pilek, who works on specifically on economical, but there are really very few. So it is worth making comparisons. Comparative approach is still worth doing also for socialism.
Yeah, Christian, do you want to ask your question?
Well,
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for your lecture, Dr. Pozharliev. So actually, I should say that I know Dr. Pozharliev because he was some kind of he was after all an editor of the special issue about the roadways and how to say road networks on the Balkans during 19th and 20th century, if I have remembered this correctly. Thank you again for your very interesting talk. And I have a long question. Were there some kind of how to say trip or road culture similar to the road culture in the United States? For example, you should make such kind of travel from the east to the west coast, or from the west coast to the east coast during your lifetime in USA. If there are similar, how to say, practice in Bulgaria or Yugoslavia during that period. For
Okay, thank you.
example, from the Petric to the
Да, благодаря и аз благодаря за въпроса. I actually don't know which volume I have edited, but good, even better.
I will be able to send the head of
No problem.
the
But let me answer. I don't know about the States. I have to admit, probably there's some similarity in the United States that I don't know. But I discussed that, in fact, the question of опознай родината, за да я обикнеш. So meet or get to know your homeland or motherland in order to love it. That was a major slogan of the Bulgarian Socialist Party, and you should visit and circulate in the country and collect stamps and so on. It definitely plays a role in that direction, because we have an ideological approach to convince the audience to go around, to circulate in the country, and to start appreciating and loving it and what not. To my knowledge, there are certain similarities also in Yugoslavia. Unfortunately, don't have them, but they were also advised on having some road maps where they can go to certain places or circulate as well. As far as I remember, not the same, completely the same concept, but they were also, for instance, there is the Bratstvo Jedinstvo train where they should go each year from Belgrade. They will go by the train, not by car, to Ljubljana and meet. Like type of Yugoslav, very, very rightly said, Yugoslav pilgrimage. Exactly. And that was, so we have such an example. They will play for sure a role, but I would suggest that, let's say, tourism, more broadly understood, but including that type of tourism, will play a significant role of constructing road networks.
Well, thank you very much. This is fascinating. Just last remarks,
yes,
because I think that first of all, thank you for the good mood and attitude. It's been a while since the Balkan Circle was so very due to the humor that you were implementing, which we do appreciate. And sometimes it's better humor, I have to admit. But there are several things that I wanted to make a comment on in regards to your future work that I'm looking very much forward to. One of them is building up what Maria Sidorkina said. When looking at the political factors, specifically for the case of Bulgaria, as we all know, until very recently, not even recently, even with the current government, the infrastructure is politics, period. Up to a point where the popular humor was calling the ex-prime minister Asfalt Pasha, by the opposition, because of his obsession as a nation builder, who wanted to succeed, basically, his probably mentor, in order to continue. If you remember, well, all of us remember following local politics, it was all about magistrati. It's just, I have built. Well, all of you have been destroyed. So one thing is, I think a fascinating route to look forward, in this, is what Maria was pointing out, that the political factor plays a lot. For instance, when you were presenting this and you were showing the it becomes obvious that it's a political move, right? To isolate, and actually it's a preventive political move, for the fear of successionism. This is in my mind. So national security also plays a huge role into it, because you are trying to put Kırgıcı, on a third and fourth round, because you're trying to put Schumann in the vicinity, in order, to preempt, because of your fear and insecurities coming out, the World War. So historical context, it's just a huge political factor. Another one is, if you remember, is while building all of this, for the purely political context, all of us Bulgarians, when we say trudovi vojski, you would immediately say that, this was, the branch of the military, which was reserved for people that were not deemed to serve, loyal, deemed to be very loyal to the regime or not to be in the battle units, but they were conscripted in a whole entire branch, which was usually reserved, unfortunately, for minorities, right? And they were engaged in all of this building projects, right? As political way to incorporate them. And interestingly enough, they were incorporating, Bulgaria to Bulgaria, and you may know the joke we have as Bulgarians, right? That you still don't have the, how can you do east to west, when the highway was not built, only recently was finished in Volga. So you have national security, you have the sociological factor, of who's been building it and how. And to put it in prospect, which I think, is fascinating to look forward, is what I'll call the politics of post-socialism, in terms of infrastructure. What do I mean? A big question of Balkan politics is the so-called corridors, which actually are based on those highways that you're describing, and the freight and the cargo and the buses and other infrastructure. For instance, that the current Bulgarian prime minister, was, almost eaten by the media, and mocked by, the people that just lost power. He's attempting to modernize and everything else, just because he said about the Danube Bridge, right? The second Danube Bridge, which actually does exist. But there was a reason why Bulgaria is not linked, for instance, and does this Yugoslavia as well. If you look at the Romanian, border, you would think, because of Transylvania. So there is a political sort of dynamic going on in the background. But in the future, I think it'll be fascinating for you to look at if you have a chance, like the politics of the road corridors, because this is where the real battles lie beyond the battles for energy, on the Balkans, and the construction of national identities, and I think that you gave us a really good example for whoever has traveled, in localities, not only Yugoslavia, but in localities that are governed by DPS. You would see that it's window shopping, exactly what you're saying, you stay here, we're gonna bring Switzerland to you. And, if you go to Buspat, it's, I would say that it's better infrastructure than almost around Sofia for all I care, and it's exactly to show some of the things that you're saying. So last one, so corridors, like transnational, where does it go to? It goes to Istanbul, which is symbolically important. Why does it? Well, not only economically. It goes to Alexandropoli, right? It goes to the coast. Why? Because it connects former lost territories. And the big question, will it ever be a link between Sofia and Skopje? Because that is at the heart of what moves currently. So if you look at this global dynamics, you'll discover, I think that this claim that you make, which is very important, that the infrastructure is material manifestation of the politics, which it is. And it's been question of politics. It has many inputs like national security, sociology, anthropology, and not last but not least, the big battles around those places which are archaeologically rich. Do you remember how many times the construction of the highway to Greece was halted, either for ecological reasons, or because of archaeological finds, because you need the specialists? So that even raises the big question: do we even have the capacity, to not go in the bulldozers, just to go and beton everything, just in a hurry, because we want to show that we are part of the European family, and it's very important for EU. But fascinating. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Very brief. I can only agree upon that there's very infrastructure enables, and that was part of the idea of this presentation, to show that you can, via infrastructure, you can approach different spheres of societal, but even societal, national, whatever, for comparative analysis purposes, and so on. So yes, national security can be also another way to approach infrastructure, and infrastructure via infrastructure to approach national security, actually, vice versa.
Oh yeah.
And then it gets even more, really more complicated when we put it on the contemporary, let's say on the European map. Let's say, so we have different. First, we have old concepts of transnational corridors, which were, by the way, created by the ministers of transport in the 1990s. But parallelly to them, we then have the new European Union agenda, which are the 10T network, which are both overarching European transnational corridors, but they're two separate projects with different funding.
Yeah, different
One is from
priorities.
10T is 100% EU. The other one is, and it will develop considering Ukraine and so on.
Uh-huh.
In the other ones, we still have 100% included Russia and so on. Most probably that won't happen at all. So, and it can get very much complicated when we go to programmatic documents of the European Union, who funds what, how much money will be given. It can get super complicated. I'm hopefully for the future that would be also part of it. And we have also sources, we have documents, decision-making policies which were taken, which are also general policies of the European Union. Then these policies, particularly about the 10T network, they will get really boosted with money now for the diversifying at least the gas network, which is basically overlaps with the 10T network, because you need the hubs and they will be boosted really very rapidly now after what happened. So yes, just a last joke about Serbia. Speaking of corridors, less about Serbia, and I'll stop. Because for many, many years, the Yugoslavs never wanted to create this small section which goes to the Bulgarian border. Right? We speak of a section of 50 kilometers or so. So
Skopje?
not to Skopje, the one to Niš, basically. They're also to Pirot and Niš. But we have a very more or less small section which could have been made. Oh, I'm sorry. Why it's not that switched off? Anyway, and so they were always oriented towards the west, the Gastarbeiterwerk and so on, always towards the west. Now, when Alexander Vučić finished this section and created a highway to Bulgaria, now he reimagined Serbia himself and said, we created finally the road to the European Union. That this is the road to Bulgaria, but it goes to the east. Well, that's, sorry.
Well, practically it is, yes.
Practically it is to the European Union.
Thank you very much.
But anyway,
Thank you.
thank you.